Speaking next on strategies for neighborhood revitalization during financial crisis is Chris Bortz. Chris Bortz is a city council member since 2005. He is also a real estate developer and attorney and serves as chair of the Hamilton County Regional Planning Partnership. He holds a Juris Doctorate from the University of Arizona. Mr. Bortz is endorsed by the Charter Committee and lives in Mount Adams.
I think we all know that the city is up against a pretty significant budget crisis, and I think that's going to be our primary focus, certainly for the next few months and probably for the next year or two. I believe our strategy should be a combination of strategic capital investment. I think Councilmember Qualls alluded to a couple of important projects, as well as streamlining city government, and that has been a challenge. We've got a government that's probably larger than it needs to be, provides more services than it should, and I think has become rather inefficient. And there are opportunities for us to create more efficiency across all departments. Public safety, of course, has to stay a priority for the city of Cincinnati, in spite of the fact that crime in some categories appears to be down in a couple of neighborhoods over the last year. The trend over the last 5 years is pretty scary, and I think most people on the street recognize that we've got a lot of work to do there and certainly shouldn't let down our guard or pat ourselves on the back. I believe a concentrated effort to share services with county government and reduce the kinds of overlap and bureaucracy that we all see. I've got a lot of experience building in the city of Cincinnati. It is by far the most difficult jurisdiction to build in. And I don't think that's because we have a lack of planning or a lack of creative codes or a lack of good people who want to focus on advancing the city's interests. It's because really the bureaucracy has become too large, too difficult. Too much power in the hands of too few individuals who really don't recognize that the solutions ought to be on the table. Not how do we make it wrong, how do we say no, but rather how do we say yes? How do we help shepherd your project or your investment, or maybe just you want to add a deck to your house? If anybody's ever tried to do that or tried to build some stairs or put a front porch on, you know how incredibly difficult it can be to work with the city of Cincinnati. And that should be our priority. If we can't be a place that's attractive to residents and businesses and families, it doesn't matter how much we talk about good plans and good thinking. People will not want to make that investment in the city. And I really think that's what Cincinnati has going for it. It is a place that if you live here and you work here, you fall in love with this community. We see it all the time. And then you can quickly become frustrated. So we should focus on those things that make people fall in love with us. Our beautiful location, our historic architecture, our, I think, great weather. And then really pay attention on how we can reduce the things that make people frustrated. And I see it, hundreds of emails a week on how irritated people can get with something as simple as fix the curb, fix the sidewalk, please pick up the garbage, for crying out loud. And those are things that really make you think that a community is well taken care of or not well taken care of. Indianapolis is a good example. Some small things like newspaper racks and bus benches and painting signposts make a big difference. Paving a street, when they pave the street in front of your house in your neighborhood, suddenly your community feels a lot different. And I think that kind of investment is what the city can do effectively. But there's a lot of things we can't do effectively. So we should understand what cities can and can't do. So that will be my focus if you choose to send me back for another term. Again, I'm Chris Bortz. Thank you very much.
Should council terms be more than 2 years? And your reasons why or why not?
I've been back and forth on this with a good friend and a fantastic council member for years, Bobby Stern, who believes that it really ought to be a 2-year election cycle because it gets us out to do these things. But after a few years now, I believe that the term is too short, that it's too difficult to really sink your teeth into something that takes some thought and takes some work, and you're too busy running for election. The politics, I believe, in our community are broken. I think we've become too partisan. Here's an example. The mayor sent out a flyer not long ago listing the 9 council members that are on his team, and it's the 9 endorsed Democrats. That's an interesting signal to the rest of the members of council. It's also an interesting signal to, oh, excuse me, it didn't include all the, and I think that's a disappointing signal. So I think 4-year terms would help undo some of the politics.
Mr. Bortz, you talked about the initiatives you have with the county to try to encourage cooperation. Can you talk a little bit more about that and what's some of the specifics, possibility of shared services or additional cooperation is possible?
Yes, actually, the Government Cooperation and Efficiency Project, or GCEP, sounds like a government mouthful, has been in place for a couple of years now, and a former city manager who has a consulting firm has been the primary consultant. Areas for obvious consolidation have already been implemented, including bulk purchasing, salt and fuel. but there are big steps that we still can take. 911 call center consolidation, which is now currently being done internally in the city, but then taking that combined city fire call center and combining it into the county would save us a couple $1 million a year. On top of that, we should be looking, I think, very deeply at code enforcement, buildings and inspections, transportation and engineering, architectural services, and those are all on the table. As well as a really interesting one, which is tax collection. There is a tax collection service in Northern Ohio that a couple of communities locally are a part of, and they take away all that overhead and they just have one office doing all the tax collection for individual communities. And the city actually could provide the service even cheaper than the one at the state level, so it's something the city could sell to our neighbors. And that's something we should pursue, I think, quickly, and we'll have a final report in a couple months.
Okay.
Mr. Bortz, obviously you're very well aware of the recent budget dispute on city council. When obviously...
Budget dispute?
Yeah, what was that? Every department is going to have to presumably take cuts next year to deal with the $51 million deficit. Should any departments be exempt from those cuts, and why, or should they all bear their share of the burden?
No department should be exempt from cuts. That's a good question, thank you. It's kind of an easy one, because I believe the challenge isn't to say, well, this department or that department is exempt. The challenge is to say these are our priorities for our services. And if politics and partisanship and all that running for another office stuff can take a back seat for a little while, I think we can focus on prioritization. And we'll find that as a municipal government, our top priority is public safety. Does that mean that police and fire can't find additional savings? Absolutely not. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're the fall guy either. To suggest that the police and fire departments are more than 60% of the city budget, of course they are. That's true in every city in America. That isn't the challenge. The challenge is how do we make them more efficient, and how do we improve the quality of their service? And reducing the number of boots on the ground is probably a mistake. And if that's the kind of subtext of your question, I would say no. Losing officers at this point would be a real problem. But we can still find other savings.
Mr. Bortz, same question.
Okay. I think the SERVE initiative was a good step in the right direction, but I think the most important thing we can do for public safety is to ensure that we have a police presence. We've seen a precipitous decline in New York City in crime, and that's entirely because of a massive hiring trend that was a part of Giuliani's initial effort, and actually started before him. So the number of police officers on the street in every single community translates to a drop in crime. A reduction in the number of police officers translates to an increase in crime. Other strategies, community-oriented policing, community involvement, CPOP, all those things are critical to ensuring a quality police department and helping to solve crimes long-term. But the best deterrent you can have really is an obvious force. And that means, I think, helping our officers spend more time on the beat, less time in their cars and behind a desk. We'll begin by saying the Brookings Institute says whenever a community hired police officers, crime went down. I don't know if that makes a community safer, but it does reduce the crime rate. So there. I will also, I think, point out that maybe the most important thing we can have is a city council that doesn't pretend to be an expert in every field. None of us are experts in policing, even though we have a former police officer. He's not a criminologist. None of us are experts in firefighting or ambulance service. And none of us are very effective politicians. And I really believe strongly that partisanship has absolutely no role in city government. It doesn't make any sense. There's no Republican way to do things, no Democratic way to do things. I've heard too many times in too many meetings. Party loyalty is very important. No, it's not. It's nonsense. And most people in the city could care less if you're a Democrat or a Republican or a Charterite. They want you to care about Cincinnati and advance the things that are right for the city. And to that, I applaud Jeff Birding for standing up to his party and Tony Fisher for doing the same. And I would like to point out my fellow Charterite Kevin Flynn, who, like me, wants to run as an independent. So thank you very much for your time.